The opulent Plaza Ballroom was a galaxy of glittering diamonds and predatory smiles. For Sarah Thompson, it was a foreign hostile planet. She clutched her small, worn handbag like a shield, feeling the weight of 100 judgmental stares on her simple off-the-rack dress. The bride was her oldest friend from college, a girl from her neighborhood who had married into the stratosphere of wealth, and she had insisted Sarah come. But now standing alone by a towering floral arrangement, Sarah felt less like a guest and more like a sociological experiment gone wrong. Across the room, Dr. Robert Westfield felt a different kind of entrapment. He was cornered by his own mother, a formidable matriarch in Chanel, who was gesturing animatedly toward Diana Blackwell, a woman with a vacant smile and a fortune in pharmaceuticals. "She's perfect, Robert," his mother hissed under the cover of the string quartet. "Her father is the chairman of the hospital board. It's time you settled down with someone appropriate." Bob's jaw tightened. Since his wife's death 10 years ago, his mother's matchmaking attempts had become increasingly aggressive. He felt like a prize stallion being paraded for auction. His eyes scanned the room, searching for any escape, and then they met hers. He saw a woman across the ballroom looking just as trapped as he felt. She was beautiful in a quiet, unassuming way, with intelligent eyes that were currently filled with a fiery mix of humiliation and defiance. He watched as an arrogant man in a tuxedo reeking of whiskey and entitlement cornered her. "I don't believe we've met," the man slurred, looking Sarah up and down as if she were an item on a menu. "You must be with the catering staff. Could you fetch me another scotch?" The insult was a public execution. Sarah's face flushed, her knuckles white as she gripped her handbag. She was about to turn and flee her pride in tatters. And in that instant, Bob saw his chance. It was a reckless, impulsive idea born of his own desperation and a sudden, inexplicable urge to rescue the woman with the defiant eyes. He excused himself from his mother with a curt nod, leaving her mid-sentence, and crossed the ballroom with the purposeful stride of a surgeon heading into an emergency. The crowd parted for him. He didn't stop until he was standing right beside Sarah. He completely ignored the arrogant guest, his entire focus on her. He leaned in his voice a low, conspiratorial whisper that was for her ears only a secret shared in a room full of strangers. "Pretend to be my wife." Sarah stared at him, her mind reeling. It was Dr. Robert Westfield, the renowned heart surgeon. She had seen his name in the society pages, had heard her friend mention his brilliance and wealth. "What?" she breathed. "Play along," he murmured, his eyes glinting with a dangerous, thrilling light. "I'll make it worth your while." Before she could protest, he took her hand, his grip warm and firm. He turned to face his stunned mother and the approaching Diana, pulling Sarah gently to his side. "Mother," he said, his voice smooth as silk and projecting just enough for those nearby to hear, "I'd like you to finally meet my wife, Sarah. We were hoping to keep it a secret a little longer, but I suppose there's no time like the present." A collective gasp rippled through the immediate vicinity. The arrogant man who had insulted her stared, his mouth agape. Eleanor Westfield looked as if she had been struck by lightning. Bob smiled a dazzling, charming smile that was pure performance. He brought Sarah's hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. "Darling," he said, his voice a low caress, "I believe they're playing our song." For the rest of the night, they were a whirlwind of convincing fiction. He never left her side, his hand always resting on the small of her back, a gesture of possessive intimacy that sent shivers down her spine. He whispered witty observations in her ear that made her laugh, a real, genuine laugh that surprised them both. They danced, and in his arms she felt a sense of safety and belonging that was utterly intoxicating. The chemistry between them was a palpable electric current, confusing and thrilling them in equal measure. At the end of the night, he escorted her to the hotel's grand entrance, away from prying eyes. The fantasy was over. "You were convincing," he said, his voice back to its cool professional tone, though his eyes still held a flicker of the night's warmth. "You're not a bad actor yourself, Doctor," she replied, her heart still pounding. He reached into his jacket and handed her a slim black business card. "I'll be in touch," he said. And with that, he turned and disappeared into a waiting black car, leaving her standing on the curb, the cool night air a stark contrast to the heat that still lingered on her skin where he had touched her. She looked down at the card in her hand, her mind spinning. What in the world had just happened? The week after the wedding was a return to the harsh gray reality of Sarah's life. The memory of the glittering ballroom of Robert's hand on her back felt like a fever dream. She worked double shifts at the cafe, the scent of coffee and freshly baked pastries, a stark contrast to the memory of champagne and his expensive cologne. Her mother Margaret had a bad turn, and a new terrifying pile of medical bills had arrived, each one a paper and ink monster, threatening to devour what little they had left. She was in the middle of the morning rush, balancing a tray of orders, when the cafe fell silent. It was the same phenomenon she had witnessed at the wedding, the sudden collective hush that announced his arrival. Robert Westfield stood in the doorway dressed in a dark, impeccably tailored suit that made him look like a king who had wandered into a peasant's hovel. His eyes scanned the room, bypassing the starstruck patrons, and landed directly on her. He walked to the counter, his presence so powerful it seemed to bend the air around him. "Miss Thompson," he said, his voice a low, calm command that cut through the cafe's clatter. "I believe we have some business to discuss." He waited while she handed off her tray to a wide-eyed coworker, then led her to a quiet corner booth. He didn't waste a moment on small talk. "I've taken the liberty of looking into your situation." He began, his tone crisp and clinical. It was a chillingly casual admission of the depth of his resources. "Your mother's early-stage Alzheimer's, the mounting debt from her medical care, your daughter's college tuition, your 2 jobs, which are still not enough to cover your expenses." He laid out the grim reality of her life as if he were reading a patient's chart. Sarah felt a flush of shame, of anger. He was dissecting her desperation with the precision of his surgical scalpel. "I am proposing a formal arrangement," he continued, his gray eyes intense, analytical. "A 1-year contract. You will perform the duties of my wife in a public-facing capacity. You will attend corporate and social events. You will live in my home. In return, I will provide full medical care for your mother in the best facility, cover your daughter's college expenses, and provide you with a monthly stipend." Sarah's first instinct was to throw her coffee in his face. "Why would you possibly need a fake wife?" she asked, her voice tight with restrained anger. "I am being considered for the position of chief of medicine at Memorial Hospital. The board, particularly Chairman William Blackwell, places a high value on stability and family image. My mother has been pushing for me to remarry since my wife's death. This arrangement would satisfy all parties and secure my position. And what happens after a year? We will have an amicable private divorce once my position is secure. You will retain financial support for your mother's care and your daughter's education." Sarah stared at him, incredulous. "You're serious?" "Entirely. I'm not asking you to compromise your integrity beyond the necessary fiction. There will be no physical expectations." His clinical tone made the words even more awkward. "This is insane," Sarah whispered. "This is pragmatic," he countered, "for both of us." A middle-aged man approached their table, his face lighting up at the sight of Bob. "There you are, you old scoundrel. I've been calling you for days." Bob stood and shook the man's hand warmly. "Michael, perfect timing. This is Sarah Thompson. Sarah, this is Dr. Michael Barnes, my oldest friend and colleague." Michael studied Sarah with open curiosity. "So you're the mystery woman from the wedding? The entire hospital is buzzing about Bob's secret wife." Sarah felt trapped in an escalating farce. "I'm not his—" "Sarah was just considering my proposal," Bob interrupted smoothly. "Perhaps you could offer your perspective. After all, it was your idea." Michael's eyes twinkled with mischief. "My dear, I've known this workaholic for 30 years. He needs someone to remind him there's a world outside the operating room. And from what I saw at the wedding, it might be exactly what the doctor ordered." Sarah looked between the two men, feeling outnumbered and outmaneuvered. "Think about it," Bob said, sliding a thick envelope across the table. "My attorney has prepared all the necessary paperwork. My number is on the card." And with that, he was gone, leaving her with a contract that felt like a deal with the devil. Sarah returned to her tiny apartment in Dorchester that evening, her mind still reeling from Bob's proposal. The contrast between his world and hers couldn't have been starker. The apartment was cramped but clean, filled with second-hand furniture and the small touches that made it home. Her daughter Emma's artwork, family photographs, potted plants on the windowsills catching the last light of day. She found her mother in the small living room, staring at the television, but not really watching it. Margaret Thompson had once been a vibrant, sharp-witted high school English teacher. Now at 75, The early stages of Alzheimer's had begun to cloud her brilliant mind. She still had more good days than bad, but the trajectory was clear and devastating. "Mom, I'm home," Sarah called, putting on a smile. Margaret turned, her face brightening. "Sarah, I made dinner. Or I was going to. Did I make dinner?" "It's okay, Mom. I'll whip something up." As Sarah moved around the kitchen assembling a simple meal, her mother followed, hovering anxiously. "There was a man looking for you today," Margaret said suddenly. Sarah froze. "What man?" "Tall, distinguished. Said he was your friend." Margaret frowned, trying to remember. "He left some papers. I put them somewhere." Sarah felt a chill. Had Bob come to her home? But no, the envelope with the contract was still in her bag. She gently guided her mother back to her favorite chair. "It was probably James from next door. He sometimes checks on you when I'm at work." The mention of their neighbor seemed to trigger a memory. "Oh, James, he fixed the sink today. Such a nice man. His Betty passed 5 years ago, you know. Cancer." Sarah nodded. James Henderson had been a rock since her husband's death. A retired firefighter, he had stepped in countless times to help with household repairs and had even driven Margaret to doctor appointments when Sarah couldn't get time off work. The phone rang and Sarah answered to hear her daughter's voice. Emma was 19, brilliant and determined, studying nursing at Boston University on a partial scholarship. She worked part-time to cover the rest, stubbornly independent like her mother. "Mom, they're raising tuition again next semester," Emma said without preamble. "I might need to take a second job." Sarah closed her eyes, leaning against the wall. "No, honey, we'll figure something out. Your studies come first." "I saw the new medical bills on your desk," Emma persisted. "I know things are tight. I can handle it." Sarah looked at the thick envelope in her bag, the contract inside, offering a solution to all their financial woes. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her. She was the pillar her family leaned on, but pillars could crack under too much pressure. "Let me handle it," Sarah said firmly. "I might have a new opportunity coming up." After dinner, while Margaret dozed in front of the television, Sarah finally opened the envelope and read the contract thoroughly. It was comprehensive, detailed, and clearly crafted by an expensive attorney. The terms were exactly as Bob had stated. She would pretend to be his wife for 1 year, live in his home, attend social functions, and present a convincing image of marital bliss to the world. In return, her mother would receive care at Westview, the most exclusive care facility in Boston. Emma's education would be fully funded, and Sarah would receive a monthly stipend that was more than she made in 3 months at the cafe. The final clause caught her eye. Both parties agree that no genuine emotional attachment will develop. Should either party violate this provision, the contract becomes immediately void. Sarah almost laughed at the absurdity of trying to legally regulate emotions, as if falling in love was something that could be prevented by a clause in a contract. She was still contemplating the document when her phone rang again. The caller ID displayed Memorial Hospital. With a sense of foreboding, she answered. "Miss Thompson, this is Memorial Hospital. Your mother was brought in about an hour ago. She had a fall at home." Sarah's world tilted on its axis. "I'm on my way." The hospital emergency room was a fluorescent-lit nightmare. Sarah rushed to the nurse's station, her heart pounding. "Margaret Thompson, she was brought in after a fall." "Are you family?" the nurse asked, barely looking up from her computer. "I'm her daughter." "She's in exam room 3. The doctor will be with you shortly." Sarah found her mother lying on a gurney, looking small and frail under the harsh lights. Margaret's eyes fluttered open when Sarah took her hand. "Sarah, where am I?" "You're at the hospital, Mom. You fell. Do you remember what happened?" Margaret's brow furrowed in confusion. "I was looking for something. Papers, I think. I must have tripped." A doctor entered the room, clipboard in hand. "Miss Thompson, I'm Dr. Patel. Your mother has suffered a mild concussion and has some bruising, but fortunately no broken bones. However, I'm concerned about her living situation. With her Alzheimer's diagnosis, living alone for any period is no longer advisable." "She doesn't live alone. I'm with her," Sarah protested. "But you were correct. She needs constant supervision now." Dr. Patel's voice was kind but firm. "I'd like to recommend a care facility specializing in Alzheimer's patients." "We can't afford that," Sarah admitted, the words bitter in her mouth. "I understand. Unfortunately, your mother's insurance won't cover the level of care she needs." We can provide information about state facilities, but there are often long waiting lists. As Dr. Patel continued explaining options that weren't really options at all, Sarah saw a familiar figure through the glass door of the exam room. Bob Westfield was striding down the hall in surgical scrubs, deep in conversation with another doctor. Without thinking, Sarah stepped into the hallway. "Dr. Westfield?" He turned, surprise briefly crossing his features before his professional mask returned. He excused himself from his colleague and approached her. "Ms. Thompson, what brings you to Memorial at this hour?" "My mother had a fall. She's going to be okay physically, but—" Sarah trailed off, suddenly aware of how desperate she must look. "The doctor says she can't be alone anymore. Her Alzheimer's is progressing." Something shifted in Bob's eyes, a flicker of genuine concern. "I see. And you're considering my offer?" It wasn't a question. Sarah lifted her chin, pride warring with necessity. "If it's still on the table." "It is." He glanced at his watch. "I have surgery in 20 minutes. Can you meet me tomorrow morning at my attorney's office, 9 o'clock? He took out a pen and wrote an address on the back of his card. Sarah nodded, feeling as if she were standing at the edge of a cliff. "I'll be there." The law offices of Wilkins and Associates occupied the top floor of a gleaming downtown high-rise with sweeping views of Boston Harbor. Sarah felt wildly out of place in her best outfit, which still looked woefully inadequate among the designer suits and Italian leather. The receptionist eyed her with thinly veiled skepticism until Bob arrived and everything changed. Suddenly she was Mrs. Westfield and treated with deferential respect. George Wilkins was a distinguished man in his 70s with silver hair and shrewd eyes that had likely seen every kind of legal maneuver imaginable. "So this is the young lady," he said, studying Sarah over his reading glasses. "Bob has explained the unusual nature of your arrangement. George has been the Westfield family attorney for 40 years, Bob explained. He's the only one who knows the truth, and it will stay that way." The next hour was spent reviewing the contract line by line. George explained each clause in layman's terms, making sure Sarah fully understood what she was agreeing to. "What about my mother?" Sarah asked. "The doctor says she needs constant care now." "I've already made arrangements," Bob said. "Westview has a room ready for her today. Their Alzheimer's unit is the best in New England. And my daughter Emma is very independent. She won't accept charity." The contract stipulates a merit scholarship from the Westfield Family Foundation. Her financial aid office will inform her she was selected based on her academic record, which from what I've seen is exemplary. Sarah felt a surge of maternal pride. "She is brilliant. She wants to be a nurse." "A noble profession," Bob said with what seemed like genuine respect. Finally, there was nothing left to discuss. George placed the contract before them along with 2 pens. "Before we sign," Bob said, his voice taking on a formal tone, "there's one last clause I want to emphasize. The emotional non-attachment provision." "Clause 27B, George noted. Bob looked directly at Sarah. "This arrangement is business, Ms. Thompson. A mutually beneficial transaction. It cannot become complicated by genuine emotions. If either of us develops real feelings, the contract is void. Is that clear?" The coldness of his tone was like a splash of icy water, reminding Sarah exactly what this was. Not a fairy tale, not Pretty Woman, but a business deal between 2 people using each other for their own ends. "Crystal clear, Dr. Westfield," she replied, matching his formality. "I assure you, falling in love with you is the last thing on my mind." Something that might have been relief or possibly disappointment flickered across his face. He signed the contract with a firm, decisive hand, then passed the pen to Sarah. She hesitated only a moment before adding her own signature, feeling as if she'd just signed away something precious, though she couldn't have said what. "Well then," George said, gathering the papers, "I believe congratulations are in order. In the eyes of the world, you are now husband and wife." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Sarah felt a curious mixture of relief and apprehension. She had saved her family, but at what cost to herself? As they left the attorney's office, Bob handed her a small velvet box. Inside was a stunning diamond ring, elegant rather than flashy, but clearly worth more than everything she owned combined. "Your wedding ring," he said matter-of-factly. "You should start wearing it immediately. The car will pick you up at 6. Pack whatever personal items you wish to bring. Everything else you need will be provided." What about my apartment, my things? Keep the apartment for now. It will support our story that we wanted privacy in the early stages of our relationship. As for your belongings, bring what matters to you. The rest can be dealt with later. He checked his phone, already moving on to the next item on his agenda. I have to get back to the hospital. George will handle the paperwork for your mother's transfer to Westview. A car will take you to see her this afternoon. And with that, he was gone, leaving Sarah standing on the sidewalk with a diamond ring and the disorienting feeling that she'd just stepped through the looking glass into another world entirely. The Westfield mansion stood in Boston's historic Beacon Hill neighborhood, a stately federal-style townhouse that had been in the family for generations. When the car dropped Sarah off that evening, she stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, taking in the elegant facade with its perfectly symmetrical windows and glossy black door adorned with a brass knocker. This would be her home for the next year. The thought was surreal. Before she could ring the bell, the door opened, revealing a slender woman in her 60s with salt and pepper hair pulled back in a neat bun. "Mrs. Westfield," the woman said, her tone professional but warm. "I'm Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper. Dr. Westfield asked me to show you in. He's been delayed at the hospital, but should return for dinner." Sarah followed Mrs. Chen into a foyer with a black and white marble floor and a crystal chandelier that cast prismatic rainbows on the walls. The house was exactly what she'd expected. Elegant, tasteful, and museum quiet. It felt like a place where people spoke in hushed tones and children were taught to keep their hands in their pockets. "Your rooms are this way, Mrs. Chen said, leading her up a sweeping staircase. Sarah had expected a guest room, perhaps a small suite if she was lucky. What Mrs. Chen showed her to was the master bedroom, a spacious chamber with tall windows overlooking a private garden. The room was dominated by a king-size four-poster bed with crisp white linens. A sitting area with two wingback chairs flanked a marble fireplace. Two doors led off the main room. "The dressing room and bathroom are through there," Mrs. Chen explained, indicating one door. "And Dr. Westfield thought you might appreciate this." She opened the second door. Sarah stepped through into what could only be described as an artist's dream. The room was flooded with natural light from skylights and floor-to-ceiling windows. Easels of various sizes stood ready, surrounded by tables laden with paints, brushes, canvases, and every other supply an artist might desire. In one corner, a drafting table was positioned to catch the best light. "Dr. Router, Westfield mentioned you're an artist," Mrs. Chen said. "He had this room prepared for you." Sarah touched the brushes, the expensive paints, unable to believe what she was seeing. This must have cost a fortune. The doctor was quite specific about what should be included. Sarah felt a confusing surge of emotion. The gesture was thoughtful, extravagant even, but was it really for her? Or just another prop in their elaborate charade? As Mrs. Chen continued the tour, Sarah discovered that the house, for all its grandeur, held a certain sadness. There was a preserved quality to some rooms, as if time had stopped years ago. In one sitting room, photographs in silver frames captured moments from Bob's previous life. His wedding to Catherine, vacations, hospital fundraisers. The couple always smiling, always touching in some small way. In one particularly poignant image, Bob looked at his wife with such naked adoration that Sarah had to look away, feeling like an intruder. The tour ended at the dining room where Mrs. Chen informed her that dinner would be served at 8. Left alone, Sarah wandered back upstairs to unpack the pitiful suitcase that contained her life's most precious possessions. In the massive walk-in closet adjoining the master bedroom, she found row after row of women's clothing, in her size, the tags still attached. Designer dresses, suits, casual wear shoes, everything she might need for her do-role. The sight of it all, the presumption, the calculation, the sheer expense left her feeling hollowed out. She was hanging up a few treasured items from home when she heard the front door open and close. Heavy footsteps on the stairs. Then Bob appeared in the doorway of the bedroom. He had changed from his surgical scrubs into a crisp white shirt and dark slacks, but exhaustion lined his face. "You're settled in?" he asked, his tone neutral. "Yes, thank you for the art studio. It's very generous." He waved away her thanks. "It's important to maintain appearances. People in our circle would expect me to support my wife's interests." The words stung more than they should have. Of course it was all for show. "I visited my mother at Westview this afternoon," Sarah said, changing the subject. "The facility is remarkable. She has a beautiful room and the staff seems excellent." They should be for what it cost. Bob replied, then caught himself. I'm glad she's comfortable. An awkward silence fell between them. They were strangers who would share a life, but not lives. About the sleeping arrangements, Bob began, clearly uncomfortable. I've had a bed made up in my study. You'll have this room to yourself. You don't have to sleep in your study. This bed is enormous. We can share it without complicating things. As soon as the words left her mouth, Sarah regretted them. Bob's expression became guarded. That won't be necessary. I often work late or have early surgeries. It's better this way. Before Sarah could respond, Mrs. Chen called up that dinner was ready. They descended to the dining room where a meal that would have fed her family for days was laid out for just the two of them. They ate mostly in silence, the clink of silverware on fine china painfully loud in the quiet room. There's a hospital fundraiser tomorrow night, Bob said finally. It will be our first public appearance as a couple. My mother will be there along with the entire hospital board. I saw the dresses in the closet. I assume there's something appropriate among them. The blue gown, I think. It matches your eyes. At her surprised look, he added, my assistant has a good eye for these things. The evening concluded with Bob retreating to his study and Sarah lying awake in the enormous bed staring at the unfamiliar ceiling. She had achieved what she set out to do. Her mother was receiving the best care possible. Her daughter's education was secure. Their financial worries were over. Yet as she drifted towards sleep, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd made a bargain she didn't fully understand with a man who remained a complete mystery. The next evening found Sarah descending the grand staircase in a sapphire blue gown that fitted as if it had been made for her. Her hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, courtesy of the stylist Bob had arranged to come to the house. She felt like an imposter, a character in a play, but the reflection in the mirror had looked convincing enough. Bob waited at the bottom of the stairs, resplendent in a black tuxedo. For a moment, as his eyes tracked her descent, she saw something flicker across his face, appreciation perhaps, or surprise. Then his professional mask returned. You look appropriate, he said, offering his arm. High praise indeed, Sarah replied dryly. The car ride to the event was spent in rehearsal. Bob briefed her on who would be there, names and relationships she should know, topics to avoid. It felt like preparing for an especially high-stakes exam. My mother will be watching us closely, he warned. She was suspicious at the wedding. Eleanor Westfield has a bloodhound's nose for deception. Then we'll have to be convincing, Sarah said, with more confidence than she felt. The Memorial Hospital annual fundraiser was held in the same hotel where they had first met, a fact that seemed to amuse Bob slightly. Back to the scene of the crime, he murmured as they entered the ballroom. If Sarah had thought the wedding was intimidating, it was nothing compared to this event. Here Bob was not just a guest, but a central figure. People gravitated toward him, colleagues seeking his opinion, board members clapping him on the back, nurses and residents watching him with admiration from a respectful distance. And then there was Eleanor Westfield. Bob's mother was a regal woman in her 80s, with perfectly coiffed silver hair and posture that would make a ballerina envious. Her eyes, the same gray as her son's, missed nothing. Robert, she said, kissing him on both cheeks before turning her laser focus to Sarah. And this is your wife. How extraordinary that you kept her hidden for so long. We wanted privacy, Mother, Bob replied smoothly. Sarah, this is my mother, Eleanor Westfield. Mother, my wife, Sarah. Eleanor extended her hand, her grip surprisingly strong for a woman her age. Charmed, I'm sure. And what is it that you do, Sarah, besides captivating my son? I'm an artist, Sarah replied, meeting the older woman's gaze steadily. Primarily oils and charcoal. How bohemian. And where did you study? I was at the Massachusetts College of Art and Design before I had to withdraw for family reasons. Eleanor's eyebrow arched. Indeed, and what family reasons might those be? Bob intervened. Mother, the Blackwells have just arrived. I believe William was hoping to speak with you about the new pediatric wing. With elegant reluctance, Eleanor allowed herself to be steered away, but not before giving Sarah a look that promised this conversation was merely postponed, not over. Round one to the matriarch, Sarah muttered. You held your ground, Bob said, a hint of approval in his voice. That's more than most manage with Eleanor. They circulated through the room a convincing portrait of newlywed bliss. Bob kept his hand at the small of her back, leaned in to whisper comments that made her laugh, introduced her to colleagues and donors with unmistakable pride. Sarah played her part with growing confidence, drawing on her genuine interest in people to engage in conversations, showing warmth and charm that seemed to surprise Bob. The real test came when they encountered Diana Blackwell and her father, William, the hospital board chairman. "Bob, there you are," Diana purred, air kissing him on both cheeks and lingering a moment too long. "And this must be your mysterious bride." "I'm Diana Blackwell." "Sarah Westfield," Sarah replied, noting how Diana's smile didn't reach her eyes. William Blackwell was a distinguished man with the confident air of someone accustomed to power. "Your Westfield, the board has been very interested in meeting your wife. We were beginning to think she was a figment of your imagination." "I assure you she's very real," Bob said, pulling Sarah closer to his side. "And what do you think of your husband's work, Mrs. Westfield?" William asked. "Do you find cardiac surgery as fascinating as we do?" It was a trap, a test to see if she was truly Bob's wife or an imposter. Sarah felt Bob tense beside her, but she was ready. "I find Bob's dedication fascinating," she said. "The way he can focus so completely on a patient, seeing possibilities others miss. Just last week, he was reviewing a case file at 3 in the morning because something didn't feel right to him. That level of commitment is rare." Bob looked at her with genuine surprise. She had been paying attention during their brief time together, noticing his late-night work habits, the way he muttered about patient files when he thought she wasn't listening. William seemed impressed. "Indeed it is. That's why we're considering him for chief of medicine. We need someone with that kind of dedication at the helm." Diana's smile tightened. "Though of course stability in one's personal life is equally important for such a position. The hospital community is like a family after all." "I couldn't agree more," Sarah replied pleasantly. "Fortunately, Bob and I have found that balance. His work is important to both of us." The conversation moved on to hospital politics, but the undercurrent was clear. Diana had been positioning herself as the perfect partner for Boston's most eligible surgeon, and Sarah's appearance had disrupted her plans. This wasn't just about Bob's career anymore. They had made an enemy. As the evening progressed, Sarah found herself enjoying aspects of the charade. Bob was surprisingly good company when he relaxed slightly. He had a dry wit that emerged in his asides about various guests and his knowledge of art, while academic was extensive enough for meaningful conversation. They danced once a slow waltz during which he held her with careful respect, maintaining just enough distance to be proper, while appearing intimate to observers. "You're good at this," he murmured against her ear. "Better than I expected." "Is that a compliment to Westfield?" "An observation, Mrs. Westfield." But there was a hint of a smile on his lips. A photographer captured the moment their faces closed, seeming to share a private joke. Later, Sarah would recognize it as the exact instant their performance began to blur with something that felt dangerously like reality. The evening was drawing to a close when Bob was called away for a brief meeting with the hospital board. Sarah found herself alone at their table, watching the remaining guests through the golden haze of champagne and candlelight. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice Eleanor Westfield approaching until the older woman was seated beside her. "I have a theory about you, Sarah," Eleanor said without preamble. "You're not who my son claims you are." Sarah's heart hammered in her chest, but her face remained composed. "I'm exactly who he says I am, his wife. Perhaps in the legal sense, but there's something arranged about this union." Eleanor's eyes were shrewd. "My son hasn't looked at a woman with genuine interest since Catherine died. Yet suddenly he has a wife no one has heard of, a woman from a background so different from his own. It doesn't add up." Before Sarah could defend herself, they were interrupted by a commotion near the entrance to the ballroom. Sarah's daughter Emma stood in the doorway, scanning the crowd with frantic eyes. When she spotted Sarah, she rushed toward her, oblivious to the stares her casual clothes drew in the formal setting. "Mom, thank God I found you. It's Grandma. The care facility called. She had some kind of episode. They want us to come right away." The blood drained from Sarah's face. She rose immediately, her role forgotten in her concern. "What happened? Is she okay?" "I don't know. They just said to come quickly." Emma suddenly seemed to realize where they were and who might be listening. She lowered her voice. "What is this place and why are you dressed like that?" Eleanor watched this exchange with growing interest, her suspicions visibly deepening. Just then Bob returned, taking in the situation with a quick glance. "Emma, I presume I'm Robert Westfield." He extended his hand. Your mother has told me about you. Emma looked between them in confusion. Mom, what's going on? Who is this man? The moment hung in precarious balance. Their entire charade could unravel with a single wrong word. But before anyone could speak, Margaret's condition took precedence. We need to go to Westview now, Sarah said firmly. Of course, Bob replied without hesitation. I'll have the car brought around. I'll come with you. That's not necessary, Sarah began. You're my wife, Bob said loud enough for nearby guests to hear. And Margaret is family now. Of course I'm coming. As they hurried out, Sarah caught one last glimpse of Eleanor's face, her expression calculating. The older woman had not missed Emma's confusion, nor the tension between Bob and Sarah. The first crack had appeared in their perfect facade, and Eleanor Westfield was not a woman to overlook such details. In the car, Emma's questions tumbled out. Mom, what's happening? Who is this man? Why did he call you his wife? Sarah exchanged a look with Bob, a silent plea for help. To her surprise, he handled the situation with unexpected grace. Emma, I apologize for the shock. Your mother and I married quietly a short while ago. We were planning to tell you in person this weekend. His voice was calm, reasonable. I understand this must be a lot to take in, especially with your grandmother's situation. But right now, let's focus on Margaret. We can discuss everything else later. Emma subsided, though her suspicious glances between them made it clear the conversation was far from over. At Westview, they found Margaret in the midst of a rare moment of clarity. She recognized Sarah immediately, her face lighting up. Sarah, darling, and Emma, too. What a wonderful surprise. Then her eyes fell on Bob, and something shifted in her expression. And who is this handsome gentleman? This is Robert, Mom, Sarah said, taking Bob's hand in what felt like a strangely natural gesture. My husband. Margaret studied Bob intently, then broke into a radiant smile. Jack, you've come back to us. Sarah froze. Jack had been her father's name. Margaret was confusing Bob with her long-deceased husband. Bob, to his credit, didn't correct the confused woman. Instead, he took her frail hand gently in his. It's lovely to see you, Margaret. The staff explained that Margaret had become agitated earlier, insisting she needed to find important papers. It was a common symptom of her condition, these urgent missions, that existed only in her mind. But seeing her family had calmed her, and now she chatted happily, her reality shifting between past and present in the fluid way of Alzheimer's patients. As they prepared to leave, Margaret caught Bob's sleeve. In a moment of startling lucidity, she looked directly into his eyes. You'll take care of my Sarah, won't you? She tries to carry the whole world on her shoulders. Bob's expression softened in a way Sarah hadn't seen before. I promise, he said, and for the first time since their arrangement began, his words rang with complete sincerity. Outside Margaret's room, Emma confronted them. Okay, now that Grandma's settled, one of you better start explaining. Mom, you got married without telling me, to a man I've never even heard of. This makes no sense. Sarah looked at Bob, uncertainty in her eyes. How much should they reveal to Emma? The truth seemed impossible, but she couldn't bear to lie to her daughter. Bob made the decision for her. Emma, your mother and I have an arrangement that benefits us both. I needed a wife for professional reasons. She needed financial security for you and your grandmother. The marriage is legal, but unconventional. Emma's eyes widened. Are you saying this is some kind of business deal, Mom? Is that true? Sarah nodded, unable to meet her daughter's gaze. It's complicated, Emma, but everything I've done for you and Grandma. So it's my fault you sold yourself because of us? Emma's voice rose in distress. No one sold anything, Bob interjected firmly. This is a mutually beneficial arrangement between consenting adults. Your mother retains her dignity and independence. She's helping me as much as I'm helping her. Emma looked between them, her expression conflicted. This is crazy. You realize that, right? Normal people don't do this. Perhaps not, Bob acknowledged, but these aren't normal circumstances. A nurse approached, gently reminding them that visiting hours were ending. The conversation would have to wait. As they drove Emma back to her dormitory, an uncomfortable silence filled the car. Just before she got out, Emma turned to Bob. If you hurt my mother, if this weird arrangement causes her any pain, you'll answer to me. I don't care how rich or important you are. Bob met her gaze evenly. I respect your protection of your mother. She's lucky to have you. Emma's parting look to Sarah was a mixture of confusion, hurt, and reluctant understanding. The bond between mother and daughter was strained but unbroken. Back at the Beacon Hill townhouse, Sarah and Bob sat in the kitchen, both emotionally exhausted from the evening. Mrs. Chen had left a pot of tea warming, a small gesture of domestic comfort in what had become a very complicated situation. "I'm sorry about Emma," Sarah said finally. "She's protective. She's your daughter. I'd be concerned if she wasn't protective." Bob poured tea for both of them, a surprisingly normal action from a man who probably had people to pour his tea for him most of the time. Eleanor is suspicious as well. This evening didn't go as planned. "Does anything ever go exactly as planned?" Sarah asked, a note of fatigue in her voice. Bob considered this, turning his teacup in his hands. "In surgery, yes. That's why I prefer the operating room to real life. Everything follows a protocol. Problems have solutions. Hearts can be fixed." He paused. "People are more complicated." "Yes, they are." Sarah studied him across the table. This man, who was her husband but not her husband, this stranger whose life was now inextricably linked with hers. "Why did you really propose this arrangement, Bob? There must be dozens of suitable women in your social circle who would be delighted to marry you for real." Bob's face closed off, the brief glimpse of vulnerability gone. "This is simpler, cleaner, no messy emotions to complicate matters." "Because of Catherine." The name hung in the air between them. Bob's expression tightened, pain flickering briefly in his eyes before being ruthlessly suppressed. "My previous marriage is not relevant to our arrangement," he said formally. But it was relevant, Sarah knew. The preserved room upstairs, the photographs, he couldn't bear to remove the wedding ring she'd noticed he still wore on a chain around his neck when he thought no one was looking. Catherine Westfield might be gone, but her ghost lingered in every corner of Bob's life. "I should get some rest," Sarah said, recognizing the wall he had thrown up. "It's been a long day." Indeed. Bob stood ever the polite host even in his own home. "Good night, Sarah." "Good night, Bob." As she climbed the stairs to the master bedroom that felt both luxurious and empty, Sarah reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. She had entered into this contract believing it was a simple exchange, her presence for financial security. But already barely 24 hours into their arrangement, she could feel the complications multiplying. Eleanor's suspicion, Emma's confusion and resentment, the hospital board's scrutiny, and most complex of all, the enigma of Bob himself, a brilliant surgeon with a frozen heart who had married a stranger to advance his career, yet treated her with a courtesy that occasionally bordered on tenderness. The final clause of their contract floated through her mind, no emotional attachment. As she drifted towards sleep in a bed that could easily fit 4 people, Sarah wondered if that provision wasn't the most unrealistic part of their entire arrangement, because emotions like hearts rarely follow the protocols we set for them, and some things once broken could never be truly fixed. The photograph of Bob and Sarah dancing at the fundraiser appeared in the society pages the next morning. They were captured in a moment of apparent intimacy, her looking up at him with a smile, him bending close as if sharing a secret. The caption read, "Dr. Robert Westfield and his new bride Sarah share a dance at the Memorial Hospital fundraiser. The previously confirmed bachelor surprised society with his recent marriage to the artist." Diana Blackwell stared at the image, her manicured nail tapping against the glossy paper. Something wasn't right about this sudden marriage, and Diana had never been one to accept defeat gracefully, especially when the prize was the position of Mrs. Robert Westfield and all the social and financial advantages that entailed. She picked up her phone and dialed a number. "I need you to look into someone for it," she said without preamble. "Sarah Thompson Westfield. I want to know everything about her, especially anything irregular." The first crack in the facade was about to widen into a chasm. 3 months passed with surprising swiftness. The rhythms of their arranged marriage had settled into something resembling normalcy, albeit an unusual one. Sarah had gradually adapted to life in the Beacon Hill mansion, finding her place in Bob's world with an ease that surprised them both. The master bedroom remained Sarah's, alone with Bob continuing to sleep in the converted study down the hall. They maintained a careful distance physically, but their daily interactions had evolved into a comfortable routine. Breakfast together before Bob left for the hospital, occasional shared dinners when his schedule permitted, and weekly public appearances as the perfect couple. On this particular morning, Sarah sat at the breakfast table sketching idly in her notebook while Bob read medical journals. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, catching the diamond on her left hand, sending prisms dancing across the white tablecloth. "You have that hospital fundraiser tonight," Sarah reminded him, not looking up from her drawing. Bob nodded, turning a page. "Black tie, the children's cardiac unit. We should leave by 7. Their conversations often had this shorthand quality, now efficient and uncluttered. Mrs. Chen refilled their coffee cups, a silent presence, managing the household with quiet efficiency. "I visited your mother yesterday," Sarah said, adding shading to her sketch. "She's doing remarkably well. The new cognitive therapy seems to be helping." Bob looked up, genuine interest crossing his features. "The music therapy." Yes, she remembered a song from her college years, sang every word. Sarah smiled at the memory. The therapist says familiar music can access memories in ways conversation can't. Something softened in Bob's expression, one of those rare glimpses beneath his professional veneer. "That's very good news. Thank you for telling me." "You should visit her," Sarah suggested gently. "She asks about you." A shadow crossed his face. "I have 3 surgeries today. Perhaps next week." The moment passed. Bob returned to his journal, his walls firmly back in place. Sarah studied him surreptitiously. Over the past months, she had assembled a mental catalog of Robert Westfield, the slight furrow between his brows when concentrating, the way his fingers unconsciously tapped surgical rhythms on any available surface, how his voice changed when speaking to patients, warmer and more accessible than his usual clipped tones. He was a puzzle she couldn't help trying to solve, despite knowing it wasn't part of their arrangement. The doorbell rang, interrupting her thoughts. Moments later, Mrs. Chen appeared. "Mrs. Westfield, your daughter is here." Emma entered the breakfast room looking tired but determined in her nursing student scrubs. At 19, she carried herself with a maturity beyond her years, a quality Sarah recognized as her own influence. "Mom." Emma greeted her with a quick hug before nodding stiffly to Bob. "Dr. Westfield." "Emma," he replied with equal formality. "How are your studies progressing?" "Well enough." Emma's acceptance of their arrangement remained reluctant at best. "The anatomy exam was brutal, but I think I did okay." "The brachial plexus gives everyone trouble," Bob commented, rising from the table. "There are some excellent reference materials in my library if you'd like to borrow them." Emma's surprise registered briefly before her guard returned. "Thanks, I'll think about it." Bob gathered his papers, every inch the busy surgeon. "I should get to the hospital." Sarah, 7 o'clock. "I'll be ready," she confirmed. After he left, Emma collapsed into his vacated chair, helping herself to coffee. "So this is still a thing, huh? Playing house with Dr. Freeze." "Emma," Sarah admonished gently, "he's been very generous to us." Yeah, grandma's care my tuition, this fancy lifestyle." Emma waved her hand dismissively. "But how are you really? Are you painting again at least?" Sarah's face brightened. "Actually, yes. Come see." She led Emma to the studio Bob had created for her, now transformed by months of work. Canvases in various stages of completion lined the walls. Several featured Boston landscapes seen from unusual perspectives. Others were abstract explorations of emotion rendered in bold colors. But the centerpiece was a large portrait, still unfinished, showing a man's hands, surgeon's hands, poised as if about to perform a delicate operation. Emma studied the paintings with a critical eye. "These are good, Mom. Really good. Better than anything you did before." "Before I had to stop," Sarah finished for her. "I know. Having the time and materials to really focus makes a difference." "So the golden handcuffs have some benefits," Emma conceded, sitting on a paint-splattered stool. "But are you happy?" The question hung in the air, deceptively simple, yet impossibly complex. "I'm content," Sarah answered carefully. "Our arrangement works. Bob and I understand each other." Emma's skeptical expression said everything. "He's not what I expected," Sarah admitted. "Beneath the cold exterior, there's a decent man. Complicated, damaged maybe, but not unkind." "You're starting to actually like him," Emma accused, eyes widening. "Mom, that's dangerous. This isn't real, remember. It's a business deal with an expiration date." Sarah turned away, busying herself with arranging brushes. "I'm aware of the terms of our arrangement. Are you? Because it sounds like you're forgetting that crucial non-emotional attachment clause you told me about." Before Sarah could respond, her phone chimed with a message from Bob. Need to reschedule tonight. Emergency surgery, details to follow. A familiar pattern these last-minute changes. Sarah showed the message to Emma. See just business. He doesn't even call, just texts. Emma studied her mother's face unconvinced. Be careful, Mom. I know you. You always find the good in people, even when it's buried under 10 feet of ice. Just remember what this really is. I remember, Sarah replied, perhaps too quickly. Now tell me more about your anatomy exam. The brachial plexus really is a nightmare. Later that afternoon, Sarah found herself at the hospital dropping off the portfolio Bob had forgotten at home. Memorial Hospital was Bob's natural habitat, the place where his authority was absolute. Nurses and residents greeted Sarah with a deference that still felt foreign, addressing her as Mrs. Westfield, with respectful nods. Linda Barnes, Michael's wife, and now Sarah's closest ally in Boston society, intercepted her in the lobby. In her 50s, with a crown of silver-streaked black hair and an infectious laugh, Linda had welcomed Sarah into their circle without reservation. Sarah, perfect timing. Michael just went into a meeting, but I was hoping to catch you. Linda linked arms with her, steering her toward the cafeteria. We need to talk about the charity art exhibition. Over coffee, Linda outlined her plan. The hospital foundation wants to do something different this year. Instead of another stuffy dinner, we thought about an art auction. And I immediately thought of you. Me, Sarah blinked in surprise. Your work is extraordinary. Michael showed me photos from your studio. We'd feature you as the headliner alongside other local artists. The proceeds would go to the Children's Cardiac Unit. Sarah hesitated. I'm flattered, but I'm not sure Bob would approve. He's particular about our public appearances. Darling, Linda leaned forward. This isn't about being Bob's wife. This is about your talent. Besides, Michael's already mentioned it to Bob, and he didn't object. He didn't. This surprised Sarah. Bob was typically controlling about anything that might affect his public image. Well, he didn't exactly jump for J-Boy, Linda admitted, but he didn't say no, which for Bob Westfield practically counts as enthusiastic endorsement. She patted Sarah's hand. Think about it. This could be your re-entry into the art world. As they were speaking, a commotion near the cafeteria entrance drew their attention. Eleanor Westfield had arrived, commanding the space as only she could. When she spotted Sarah, she made a direct line for their table. Sarah, Eleanor greeted her with air kisses. How fortunate to find you here. I was just visiting the board members about the new wing dedication. Her gaze flicked to Linda. Mrs. Barnes. Eleanor, Linda replied, equally cool. Always a pleasure. I wonder if I might borrow my daughter-in-law for a moment, family matters. Linda excused herself with a meaningful glance at Sarah that clearly said, good luck. Eleanor slid into the vacated seat, removing her gloves with deliberate precision. I've been meaning to visit your mother at Westview. Such a lovely facility. Robert was very generous to arrange it. Yes, he was, Sarah agreed cautiously. It must be difficult watching a parent's mind deteriorate. Alzheimer's is such a cruel disease. Eleanor's tone was sympathetic, but her eyes remained calculating. I understand your late husband was a police officer, died in the line of duty. Yes. How tragic. And now you find yourself married to one of Boston's most eligible bachelors. Quite a change of circumstances. Sarah met the older woman's gaze steadily. Life takes unexpected turns. Indeed it does. Eleanor smiled thinly. My son has changed since your marriage. His colleagues have noticed. He's less focused. His surgical record remains impeccable, Sarah countered. For now, but distraction can be dangerous in his profession. Eleanor leaned forward. I want you to understand something, Sarah. The Westfield legacy at Memorial Hospital spans 3 generations. Robert is poised to become chief of medicine, continuing that legacy. Nothing should jeopardize that. Nothing and no one. The threat was unmistakable. Before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed with another text from Bob. Surgery complete, success, dinner at home, 8 p.m. Eleanor noticed the message. Ah, my son beckons. Don't let me keep you. We'll continue this conversation another time. She rose gracefully. The annual Cape Cod weekend is coming up. The Westfield summer home has hosted family gatherings for decades. This year, you'll be joining us, of course. We can become better acquainted then. With that ominous promise, Eleanor swept away, leaving Sarah with the distinct impression of having survived a preliminary skirmish in what promised to be a prolonged campaign. That evening, Sarah and Bob ate a quiet dinner prepared by Mrs. Chen. Bob looked exhausted but satisfied the way he always did after a successful surgery. "I saved a 10-year-old boy today," he said uncharacteristically, volunteering information about his work. "Complex congenital defect. We tried a new approach, one I've been developing." "That's wonderful," Sarah said sincerely. "His parents must be so grateful." They were. A shadow crossed his face. The mother hugged me, wept on my shoulder. "It's always awkward." "Being thanked for saving a child's life?" Sarah asked, bemused. "The emotional displays," Bob clarified. "They're difficult to navigate." Sarah studied him across the table. "You prefer your patients unconscious, don't you? It's the human interaction that complicates things." Bob looked startled, then thoughtful. "An insightful observation. Perhaps there's some truth to it. Yet you chose medicine, not research. You could have worked with cells in a lab, no messy humanity involved." A faint smile touched his lips. "Now you sound like Catherine. She used to say the same thing." The mention of his late wife hung in the air between them. Bob rarely spoke of Catherine voluntarily. "She was a pediatrician," Sarah said, carefully testing the waters. "You must have had that in common, caring for patients." "She was brilliant with children, natural, instinctive." Bob's expression softened with memory. "I'm more comfortable with anatomy, the mechanics of the heart." Catherine understood the people attached to those hearts. He fell silent, retreating into private recollection. Sarah recognized the moment for what it was, a rare glimpse behind his defenses. "I met your mother today," she said, changing the subject. "She mentioned a Cape Cod weekend." Bob's expression shifted back to neutral. "Ah, yes, family tradition. The summer house in Cape Cod. Typically unbearable but unavoidable. She seemed very eager to have me there." "I'm sure she did," Bob said dryly. "Mother views you as a mystery to be solved. She doesn't trust what she doesn't understand." "And what exactly doesn't she understand?" Sarah asked. "Why I would marry someone outside our social circle, someone without the appropriate pedigree." Bob regarded her steadily. "She suspects our arrangement isn't conventional." "Is she right to be suspicious?" "Of course, but that doesn't mean she'll discover the truth." Bob took a sip of wine. "We've been convincing thus far. The hospital board is increasingly comfortable with my candidacy for chief of medicine. William Blackwell mentioned the final decision will be made within 2 months." "And then," Sarah asked, though she knew the answer, "then our arrangement continues for the remainder of the agreed year. Appearances must be maintained during my initial tenure as chief." The clinical way he outlined their future reminded Sarah sharply of the transactional nature of their relationship. Just business, as Emma had warned. Yet over these months, something had shifted between them, a warming that neither acknowledged. "The art exhibition," Sarah said abruptly. "Linda Barnes mentioned it today. She wants to feature my work." Bob seemed surprised she'd brought it up. "Michael mentioned the concept. It could be beneficial for the hospital's image." "And what about my image as your wife? Your artistic talent reflects well on both of us. The Westfield family has a tradition of supporting the arts." He studied her with newfound interest. "Is this something you want to do?" The question caught Sarah off guard. Bob rarely inquired about her wants or preferences. "Yes," she admitted. "I think it is." "Then you should do it. I'll have my assistant coordinate with Linda." Such a simple exchange, yet it felt significant the first time Bob had encouraged her to pursue something solely because she desired it, not because it served their arrangement. 2 weeks later, they made the drive to Cape Cod following the coastline as it curved like a flexed arm into the Atlantic. The Westfield summer home turned out to be a sprawling shingle-style mansion perched on a bluff overlooking the ocean, surrounded by weathered pines and flowering hydrangeas. Built in the early 1900s, it had the dignified, slightly worn grandeur of old money. Sarah stood on the wide porch, breathing in the salt air, while Bob supervised the unloading of their luggage. The ocean stretched before her vast and changeable whitecaps, dancing under a sky-threatening rain. There was a wildness here that Boston lacked, a natural beauty unconfined by human ambition. "The house has been in the family for 4 generations," Bob said, joining her at the railing. "My great-grandfather built it after making his fortune in shipping." "It's beautiful," Sarah said sincerely. "Different from what I expected." "More relaxed than the Boston house," Bob agreed. though relaxed is relative when my mother is in residence. Eleanor had arrived earlier that day along with various Westfield cousins, family friends, and of course the Blackwells. Sarah had been introduced to so many people upon arrival that their names and faces blurred together, though the general assessment of her remained consistent. Polite curiosity mixed with barely concealed evaluation. There you are, Michael's booming voice interrupted them as he and Linda arrived on the porch, drinks in hand. The wind's picking up, storm coming in tonight according to the locals. Perfect for a cozy evening by the fire, Linda said cheerfully, handing Sarah a glass of wine. Though Eleanor's determined to press on with dinner on the terrace, tradition apparently regardless of impending meteorological doom. Mother believes acknowledging the weather is beneath the dignity of a Westfield, Bob remarked with unexpected humor. The evening unfolded exactly as Linda predicted. Dinner was served on the terrace despite darkening skies and increasingly gusty winds. Eleanor presided at the head of the table, imperious and unperturbed by the napkins that occasionally took flight. The conversation flowed around topics safe for polite company, hospital politics, summer plans, gentle gossip about mutual acquaintances. Sarah found herself seated beside William Blackwell, with Diana directly across watching her with undisguised scrutiny. Sarah, your husband tells me you're quite the artist, William said genially. We're looking forward to the exhibition. It's refreshing to have new blood in the Hospital Foundation activities. Thank you. I'm excited to contribute, Sarah replied. And what sort of art do you create? Diana asked with manufactured interest. Landscapes, still lifes, the typical amateur subjects. The condescension was unmistakable. Sarah felt Bob tense beside her, but she placed a calming hand on his arm. Actually, my current series explores the intersection of medical imagery and emotional states, she answered smoothly. Anatomical hearts rendered through the lens of human experience. Bob's work has been quite inspirational. William looked genuinely intrigued. Fascinating concept, bridging science and art. How convenient that your work aligns so perfectly with the hospital's interest. Diana observed, her smile sharp, almost as if the relationship were designed for mutual benefit. The comment hung dangerously close to the truth. Sarah felt a flutter of anxiety, but Bob intervened with practiced ease. Sarah's artistic focus predates our relationship, Diana. But yes, we discovered many shared interests as we got to know each other. He turned to Sarah, his expression softening. Her perspective has been enlightening for my own work. Sometimes seeing the heart through an artist's eyes reveals truths a surgeon might miss. The genuine warmth in his voice surprised Sarah. This wasn't the rehearsed script they usually followed in public. There was authenticity in his words that sent an unexpected thrill through her. The first fat raindrops began to fall splattering on the white tablecloth. Eleanor looked skyward with aristocratic disapproval, as if the weather had personally insulted her. Perhaps we should move to the drawing room for dessert, she conceded reluctantly. The evening continued indoors as the storm intensified, rain lashing the windows and wind howling around the eaves. By the time guests began departing for their rooms, the tempest was in full fury, a proper nor'easter battering the coastline. Sarah stood at the bedroom window, watching lightning illuminate the churning ocean below. Bob entered quietly, loosening his tie with a sigh of relief. Quite a performance, he said. You handled Diana beautifully. She suspects something, Sarah replied, not turning from the window. She practically accused us of an arranged marriage at dinner. Diana has always had a vivid imagination, particularly where I'm concerned. Bob's reflection appeared beside hers in the glass. She's been angling to become Mrs. Westfield since medical school. Fortunately, I found a superior candidate. The compliment delivered in his matter-of-fact tone nevertheless warmed her. Outside, the storm raged on a branch, scraping against the side of the house with each gust. That doesn't sound good, Sarah observed. The old maple. It's been threatening to come down for years. Bob moved closer to the window. My father used to say that tree would outlive us all out of sheer stubbornness. Another crash, louder this time, followed by the distinctive sound of breaking glass downstairs. Bob frowned. Stay here, I'll check it. I'm coming with you, Sarah countered, already reaching for her robe. 2 sets of eyes are better than 1. And they found the damage in the conservatory where a large branch had smashed through one of the floor-to-ceiling windows, allowing rain and wind to invade the space. Plants were overturned, delicate furniture scattered. We need to cover this, before it damages more of the house, Bob said, surveying the chaos. Working together, they managed to secure a heavy tarp over the broken window, battling wind and rain that seemed determined to defeat their efforts. Sarah held the flashlight while Bob hammered the tarp into place, their clothes-soaked hair plastered to their faces. It was messy physical work, utterly unlike their usual carefully orchestrated interactions. The final nail in place, Bob stepped back to inspect their work, but his foot caught on the edge of the tarp. He stumbled backward, losing his balance on the wet floor. Sarah lunged forward instinctively, catching his arm before he could fall into the jagged remains of the window. For a moment they froze in tableau, Bob, half falling, Sarah anchoring him, their faces inches apart. Time seemed suspended as they stared at each other, rain dripping from their hairbreadth, mingling in the storm-cooled air. Something electric passed between them, a current stronger than mere physical attraction. Without conscious decision, Bob's free hand rose to cup her face. His thumb traced her cheekbone with gentle wonder, as if discovering something precious and unexpected. Sarah leaned into his touch, her heart hammering against her ribs. When their lips met, and it felt inevitable, not their first kiss, but the first that held no audience, no performance, no purpose beyond the kiss itself. It was tentative at first, then deepening with shared hunger, months of carefully maintained distance collapsing in an instant of honest connection. Bob pulled away, first his expression, a mixture of confusion and desire. Sarah, he whispered her name, a question he couldn't fully articulate. The spell-broken reality came rushing back. Their arrangement, the contract. Clause 27B, specifically prohibiting exactly this kind of emotional entanglement. "We should go change," Sarah said, her voice unsteady. "We're soaked." "Yes," Bob agreed, taking a deliberate step back. Practical thinking. They returned to their room in weighted silence, carefully not touching each lost in private thoughts. The simple act of helping each other tarp a broken window had somehow crossed a boundary neither had intended to approach, much less breach. The next morning dawned clear and brilliant, the storm having spent its fury overnight. Sarah rose early, leaving Bob still sleeping in the armchair where he had insisted on spending the night. She made her way down to the beach, sketch pad in hand, drawn to the dramatic aftermath of the storm, driftwood scattered like bones along the shoreline. Seaweed draped over rocks, the ocean now deceptively calm under a watercolor sky. She was so absorbed in capturing the scene that she didn't hear Bob's approach until his shadow fell across her paper. He looked rested, despite his uncomfortable night, dressed casually in khakis and a sweater that softened his usual formal appearance. "You're up early," he observed, hands in his pockets. "The light after a storm is perfect for drawing," she replied, not meeting his eyes. "Everything washed clean." He settled beside her on the sand, a careful distance between them. "About last night." "We don't need to discuss it," Sarah interrupted. "It was just the storm, the adrenaline. It didn't mean anything." Bob studied her profile, her focus determinedly on her sketch. "Is that what you believe?" The question hung between them, dangerous in its simplicity. Before she could formulate a response, voices called from further up the beach. Eleanor and Diana were approaching, impeccably dressed for a morning constitutional, despite the debris-strewn shore. "Robert? There you are," Eleanor called. "William's been looking for you, something about hospital business." Bob rose, brushing sand from his clothes. "I'll find him now." "And Sarah," Eleanor continued, "I thought we might tour the art collection this morning. The Westfields have been collectors for generations. I'd value your professional opinion." The invitation was clearly a command. Sarah gathered her sketching materials, aware of Diana's sharp gaze cataloging every interaction between her and Bob, searching for weaknesses or inconsistencies. As they separated Bob toward the house, Sarah accompanying the women along the shoreline, she felt the moment of potential honesty slipping away, replaced by the familiar performance their lives had become. Yet something fundamental had shifted. The kiss in the storm-lashed conservatory couldn't be undone or forgotten, no matter how firmly they both might deny its significance. Later that day, alone in the Westfield art collection, Sarah found herself standing before a portrait that stopped her breath. Catherine Westfield, Bob's late wife, captured in oils by a skilled hand. She was beautiful in an understated way, with intelligent eyes and a gentle smile. The artist had caught something essential about her, a compassionate wisdom, a quiet strength. "She was extraordinary," Eleanor's voice came from behind her. "The only woman I ever considered worthy of my son." Sarah turned to find Bob's mother, watching her with unreadable eyes. The artist captured her spirit, Sarah said honestly. Yes. Eleanor moved closer, studying the portrait alongside Sarah. Catherine understood Robert in ways no one else ever has. She knew how to navigate his complexities, his brilliant mind, his limitations with emotional expression. Her death must have been devastating for everyone who loved her. It broke something in him, Eleanor said quietly, momentarily dropping her imperious facade. He was with her at the end, you know. She was brought to his hospital after the accident. He operated himself, refused to let anyone else touch her. For hours he fought to save her, long after others would have accepted the inevitable. Sarah felt a wave of empathy for Bob, imagining the scene, the desperation, the refusal to accept loss, the final devastating failure. When he finally emerged from surgery, Eleanor continued, he was changed. The Robert who went into that operating room never really came out again. He closed himself off, buried himself in his work. Until you. She turned to Sarah, eyes sharp again. Which is why I find your sudden appearance in his life so curious. Love is often unexpected, Sarah replied, the practiced line sounding hollow even to her own ears. Indeed. Eleanor's smile was cold. Diana has been making inquiries about you, you know. Your background, your convenient appearance at precisely the moment Robert needed a wife to secure his position. The timing is remarkable. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air-conditioned gallery. I'm not sure what you're implying. I think you understand perfectly, Eleanor replied. Whatever arrangement you have with my son, I will discover it. And if it threatens his career or the Westfield legacy in any way, I will end it. And you. She patted Sarah's arm with grandmotherly affection that belied her words. Now shall we continue our tour? The Monet in the next room is particularly fine. The remainder of the weekend passed in a blur of forced socializing and calculated appearances. Sarah and Bob maintained their perfect facade, playing the happily married couple with practiced ease. Yet beneath the performance tension simmered the unacknowledged kiss, Eleanor's thinly veiled threats, Diana's predatory vigilance. On the drive back to Boston, rain returned pattering against the windshield of Bob's luxury sedan. They had barely spoken since leaving Cape Cod, the silence between them heavy with unspoken thoughts. Eleanor showed me Catherine's portrait, Sarah said, finally watching droplets race down her window. Bob's hands tightened on the steering wheel. I should have warned you. Mother enjoys catching people off guard. She was beautiful. The artist captured a kindness in her eyes. Yes. The single word contained volumes of loss. Your mother told me about the accident, that you operated on her. Bob was silent so long, Sarah thought he might not respond. When he did, his voice was distant, clinical. Traumatic aortic rupture. The survival rate is less than 10%, even under ideal circumstances. By the time they brought her in, he trailed off. I should have recognized the futility earlier. I wasted precious resources on a lost cause because I couldn't accept the inevitable. You tried to save your wife, Sarah said gently. That's not wasting resources. That's being human. Being human cost the hospital an operating room for 6 hours. Being human meant I wasn't thinking clearly, wasn't making rational decisions. And that's why you created our arrangement, Sarah realized aloud. A marriage without emotional complications. No risk of repeating that loss of control. Bob's silence was confirmation enough. The kiss, Sarah said, forcing herself to address what they had both been avoiding. It violated Clause 27.b. A momentary lapse, Bob replied, his voice carefully neutral. The storm, the physical proximity, it meant nothing. The words stung more than they should have. Of course, nothing at all. They drove the remainder of the journey in silence, each retreating behind their private defenses, the rain a steady accompaniment to unspoken regrets. Yet as Boston's skyline appeared through the mist, Sarah couldn't help but notice that Bob's free hand had moved to rest on the console between them, fingers extended slightly toward her, not quite reaching, not quite retreating, suspended in the uncertain space between their carefully constructed fiction and a truth neither was prepared to acknowledge. The hospital charity art exhibition transformed the normally austere Memorial Hospital atrium into an elegant gallery. Spotlights illuminated paintings mounted on temporary walls, turning the medical facility into a showcase for Boston's artistic talent. At the center of it all stood Sarah's collection, a series she had titled The Anatomical Heart, featuring 12 canvases exploring the human heart through both medical precision and emotional metaphor. The centerpiece was her largest work, a life-sized human heart, rendered with surgical accuracy, but surrounded by a swirl of color and light that suggested something beyond mere muscle and valve, the ineffable quality that made a heart more than just an organ. It was the piece she had been working on for months, the one inspired by watching Bob's hands during surgery, by the stories he told of lives saved and lost, by the growing understanding of the man behind the surgeon's mask. It's extraordinary, Linda Barnes whispered, squeezing Sarah's arm. Everyone's talking about it. You've stolen the show, darling. Sarah smiled nervously, scanning the growing crowd. Boston's elite had turned out enforced checkbooks ready for the auction that would benefit the children's cardiac unit. Is Bob here yet? Still in surgery, I'm afraid. The Landry boy's case ran long. Michael says it's going well, though. Sarah nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. Bob had promised to attend to support her debut back into the art world after so many years. But surgery came first, always had, always would. She understood this about him now. Sarah, your work is magnificent. Eleanor Westfield approached elegant in midnight blue silk, her assessment shrewd as always. Such a unique perspective on the heart, almost as if you had insider knowledge of cardiac surgery. Bob has been generous in sharing his expertise, Sarah replied carefully. I'm sure he has. Eleanor's smile didn't reach her eyes. The board members are quite impressed. This event has raised the hospital's cultural profile considerably. William Blackwell was just commenting on what an asset you've become to the Westfield family image. Before Sarah could respond, Diana Blackwell appeared at Eleanor's elbow, champagne flute in hand. Sarah, congratulations on your little exhibition. Such an interesting hobby for a doctor's wife. Art isn't a hobby for Sarah, Linda interjected. She's a professional with formal training at the Massachusetts College of Art and Design. Yes, though she never completed her degree, did she? Diana's smile was poisonous honey. Life got in the way, I understand. How fortunate that marriage to Robert has allowed you to pursue your interests again. The undercurrent was clear. Sarah was a charity case, elevated by her connection to the Westfield name rather than her own talent. If you'll excuse me, Sarah said with forced politeness, I should greet the other guests. She moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and discussing her work with genuine enthusiasm, but always aware of Diana shadowing her movements, watching and listening with predatory focus. The event was reaching its peak when a ripple of awareness passed through the gathering. Bob had arrived still in surgical scrubs beneath a hastily donned jacket, his face bearing the focused intensity that always followed a complex procedure. He made straight for Sarah, navigating the crowded space with single-minded determination. I apologize for being late, he said, taking her hand in a gesture that had become natural over their months together. The surgery was more complicated than anticipated. The Landry boy, is he all right? Something in Bob's expression softened at her immediate concern for the patient. Yes, difficult case, but successful outcome. He'll make a full recovery. That's what matters most, Sarah said sincerely. Bob's gaze moved to the painting surrounding them, settling on the centerpiece. He studied it with the same intense focus he brought to surgical challenges, taking in every detail, every brushstroke. This is how you see it, he said quietly. The heart. Not just the anatomy, but the essence of the bam. It's how I see your work, Sarah corrected gently. The precision and science, yes, but also the humanity beneath. For a moment they stood in silent communion, surrounded by crowds, yet somehow alone together, connected by understanding that transcended their arranged circumstances. The spell broke when William Blackwell approached, hand extended. Dr. Westfield, glad you could join us. Your wife's exhibition is the talk of Boston society. The board is extremely impressed with the Westfield's contribution to hospital advancement on all fronts. Sarah deserves all the credit, Bob replied, his hand remaining protectively at the small of her back. Her vision, her talent. Indeed. William agreed, though his attention was clearly on Bob rather than Sarah's artwork. Speaking of vision, the board would like to meet with you tomorrow morning. I believe we're ready to make our decision regarding the chief of medicine position. Bob's posture straightened almost imperceptibly. I'll be there. As William moved away, Sarah felt the weight of what tomorrow would bring. The hospital position, the very reason for their arrangement, was finally within reach. Everything had gone according to plan. So why did success feel so hollow? The auction proceeded brilliantly, with Sarah's pieces fetching prices that established her as a serious artist. The centerpiece heart painting sparked a bidding war, eventually selling to an anonymous buyer for a sum that made Sarah lightheaded. All proceeds would go to the Children's Cardiac Unit, enough to fund new equipment and expanded treatment programs. As the evening wound down, Sarah found herself standing alone before her sold centerpiece, committing it to memory before it would be taken to its new home. "You should be proud," Bob's voice came from behind her. "You've accomplished something significant tonight." "We both have," Sarah replied, turning to face him. "Tomorrow you'll likely be named Chief of Medicine. Everything you wanted. Everything we arranged for." He corrected his expression, unreadable. A weighted silence fell between them, filled with words neither seemed able to speak. "I should find Linda and thank her for organizing this," Sarah said, finally retreating to safer ground. Bob nodded, professional mask firmly in place. "I'll meet you at the car in 20 minutes. I need to check on the laundry boy before we leave." They separated, each moving through the thinning crowd with practiced social grace, playing their roles flawlessly, even as the foundation of their arrangement trembled beneath unacknowledged truths. The next morning, Sarah sat in the sunroom of the Beacon Hill house, pretending to sketch while actually watching the clock. Bob had left for the hospital board meeting hours ago, impeccable in his finest suit, his expression betraying nothing of his thoughts or feelings. Today was the day, the culmination of their plan. Bob would be named Chief of Medicine, securing the Westfield legacy at Memorial Hospital for another generation. Their arrangement would continue for a few more months, maintaining appearances through the transition period, and then Sarah's pencil stilled on the paper. And then it would end. The contract would be fulfilled. She would receive the agreed-upon settlement, her mother's care would continue, Emma's education would be secure, Bob would move on, perhaps eventually finding someone appropriate to be the real Mrs. Westfield. Someone with the right background, the right connections, someone Eleanor would approve of. The thought brought a physical pain she hadn't expected. The doorbell rang, interrupting her spiraling thoughts. Mrs. Chen appeared moments later. "Mrs. Westfield, Miss Diana Blackwell is here to see you." Sarah's stomach tightened with apprehension. "Show her in, please." Diana entered the sunroom with calculated casualness, declining Sarah's offer of tea. "This isn't a social call," she said, removing a manila envelope from her designer handbag. "I thought you should see this before it becomes public knowledge." Sarah accepted the envelope with growing dread. Inside was a copy of a legal document. She recognized immediately the contract she and Bob had signed, establishing the terms of their arrangement. "Where did you get this?" Sarah asked, her voice remarkably steady, despite the panic rising in her chest. "Does it matter?" Diana smiled, triumph gleaming in her eyes. "What matters is that I know the truth. Your marriage is a sham, a business transaction designed to secure Robert's position as chief of medicine. You had no right to access private legal documents." "Perhaps not," Diana conceded with a careless shrug. "But now that I have, I face an ethical dilemma. Should I share this information with the hospital board as they deliberate Robert's appointment? They might be interested to know their potential. Chief of medicine is capable of such calculated deception." The threat hung in the air between them, naked and unmistakable. "What do you want, Diana?" "When I merely thought you deserved to know your situation. After all, once the board learns the truth, your arrangement with Robert becomes worthless. The entire premise collapses." Diana examined her manicure casually. Of course, if Robert were to withdraw his candidacy voluntarily, perhaps citing a desire to focus on his surgical practice, there would be no need for any unpleasant revelations. "You expect him to give up the position he's worked toward his entire career. Sometimes we must make sacrifices for those we care about." Diana's smile was venomous. "Although in your case, I suppose caring wasn't part of the arrangement, was it quite specifically prohibited, if I recall the contract correctly?" Sarah maintained her composure until Diana left the threat lingering in her wake. Then she sank onto the nearest chair, the copied contract clutched in trembling hands, her mind racing through impossible options. When Bob returned home that evening, his expression was unreadable as always, giving no indication of the board's decision. He found Sarah in his study, the contract spread before her on his desk. "Diana Blackwell paid me a visit today," she said without preamble. "She has a copy of our arrangement." Bob's face remained impassive, but Sarah had learned to read the minute changes in his posture, the slight tightening around his eyes that signaled distress. "That's legally troubling, but practically irrelevant," he said after a moment. "The board voted this morning. I've been named chief of medicine effective immediately." Congratulations," Sarah said automatically, then frowned. But Diana threatened to expose our arrangement to the board. Apparently she waited too long. The vote was unanimous. Bob loosened his tie, his movements precise and controlled as always. William Blackwell called Diana's actions a regrettable lapse in judgment stemming from personal disappointment. He apologized on her behalf. "So it's over," Sarah said, the words tasting bitter. "You've achieved what you wanted." "What we arranged for," Bob corrected, echoing their exchange from the night before. "Yes, of course." Sarah gathered the contract pages with unsteady hands. "I should start making preparations. Finding an apartment, arranging for mother's continued care. According to the terms, we maintain the appearance of marriage for 3 more months, then file for an amicable divorce." Bob watched her movements. His expression shuddered. "That was the agreement. And the settlement terms remain as specified." "Of course, you've fulfilled your part of the contract admirably." His voice was formal, distant. "More than admirably. The exhibition was an unexpected benefit to the hospital's reputation." "I'm glad I could provide good value," Sarah said, unable to keep the hurt from her voice. "If you'll excuse me, I have some calls to make." She moved to leave, but Bob's voice stopped her at the doorway. "Sarah." He paused, seeming to search for words, an unusual hesitation for a man typically so precise in his speech. "I was thinking we might visit Cape Cod this weekend. The house is empty now that the summer season is ending. It would be a chance to discuss the transition arrangements in private." The request was so unexpected, so contrary to their established pattern, that Sarah simply nodded before continuing upstairs, her mind a whirl of confusion and conflicting emotions. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. The house felt suffocating, despite its spaciousness. Every room filled with memories of the life they'd crafted together, a life built on contractual obligation that had somehow, without permission, begun to feel real. She slipped from bed and made her way to the art studio, seeking the solace of creation. There in the moonlight, streaming through the skylights, she began a new painting, not calculated or careful like her exhibition pieces, but raw and emotional, the colors flowing from her brush in urgent, honest strokes. She didn't hear Bob enter, only becoming aware of his presence when he spoke from the doorway. "You couldn't sleep either," he observed quietly. Sarah didn't turn from her canvas. "Too much on my mind." He moved closer, studying her work, an abstract explosion of color and form that nonetheless suggested two figures separate yet connected by threads of light. "Is that us?" he asked, surprising her with his perception. Sarah's brush stilled. "I don't know what it is yet, just feelings. I'm not very good with those." Bob admitted, the simple acknowledgement more revealing than any lengthy confession. "I've noticed," Sarah replied, attempting lightness, but achieving only vulnerability. "The anonymous buyer of your centerpiece at the auction," Bob said abruptly. "It was me." Sarah turned to him, startled. "You? But why?" "I couldn't bear the thought of it belonging to someone else." The admission seemed to cost him each word carefully measured. It felt personal, not just the art to be displayed, but something between us, something true. The moment stretched between them, fragile and weighted with possibility. "Clause 27B, Sarah said, finally naming the specter that haunted them both. "We agreed that emotional attachment would void the contract." "Yes. And now you've achieved what you wanted. The position is yours." "The position, yes." Bob took a step closer, close enough that she could see the conflict in his eyes. "But I find myself reevaluating other aspects of our arrangement." Sarah's heart thundered in her chest. "Robert." The shrill ring of the telephone cut through the tension. At this hour, it could only be the hospital. Bob answered the extension in the studio, his expression immediately shifting to professional focus as he listened. "I'll be right there," he said, hanging up with controlled urgency. "Emergency case, multiple trauma victims from a highway accident. I have to go." The moment shattered reality intruding, as it always did. Bob paused at the doorway looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. "We'll continue this conversation when I return," he said. "Please wait." Then he was gone, leaving Sarah alone with her unfinished painting and the echoes of words that might have changed everything. Dawn found Sarah still in the studio, surrounded by canvases filled with the emotions she couldn't express aloud. The telephone rang again, and she answered with a sense of foreboding. It was Michael Barnes, his normally jovial voice grave. "Sarah, is Bob there?" "No, he was called to the hospital around 2 a.m. Highway accident cases." "Yes, I know. That's why I'm calling." Michael's voice tightened with concern. "He's been in surgery for 6 hours straight, 3 critical patients back to back. The last case, there were complications. Bob refused to leave, insisted on continuing, despite exhaustion." A chill ran through Sarah's body. "Is he all right?" "Physically, yes, but—" Michael hesitated. "He's not himself. The patient, a young woman about Emma's age, didn't make it. Bob took it hard. He's refusing to speak to anyone, locked himself in his office. Linda suggested I call you." "I'll come right away," Sarah said, already moving toward the bedroom to change. Memorial Hospital was in controlled chaos when Sarah arrived, the emergency department still processing victims from the highway pileup. She made her way to the surgical floor where Linda was waiting. "Thank God you're here," Linda said, embracing her. "He's still in his office. Won't even open the door for Michael. It's not like him to lose control this way." "The patient?" Sarah asked. "The young woman who didn't make it. What happened?" Linda's expression was pained. Multiple trauma, massive internal bleeding. By all accounts, no one could have saved her. But you know Bob, he takes every loss personally, even when he pretends not to. And this one, Michael says she reminded him of Catherine. Same coloring, similar features. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, understanding washing over her. History repeating itself, another young woman. Bob couldn't save another failure he would internalize as personal weakness. "Let me try," she said, approaching the office door. She knocked gently. "Bob, it's Sarah. Please open the door." Silence greeted her, stretching so long she thought he might be ignoring her too. Then came the sound of movement, and the door opened to reveal Bob still in blood-stained surgical scrubs, his face haggard with exhaustion, and something deeper, more devastating. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice rough. "Yes, I should." Sarah stepped into the office, closing the door behind her. Bob moved to the window, staring out at the Boston skyline, now bathed in morning light. "I couldn't save her. 22 years old, entire life ahead of her, and I failed." "You didn't fail," Sarah said firmly. "You did everything humanly possible. Michael told me the injuries were catastrophic. I should have been able to repair the aortic dissection. My hands weren't steady enough. I've been chief of medicine for less than 24 hours, and I've already proven myself unworthy of the position." Sarah said with an intensity that finally made him look at her. "This isn't about your position or your surgical skills. This is about Catherine." Bob flinched as if struck. "This has nothing to do with my wife. It has everything to do with her. The patient reminded you of Catherine. You tried to save her the way you couldn't save your wife 10 years ago." Sarah moved closer, refusing to let him retreat into cold professionalism. "You're not God, Robert. You're human. Brilliantly, frustratingly human." Something cracked in his carefully maintained facade. "I can't afford to be human in the operating room. Emotions cloud judgment. Emotional surgeons lose patience. And surgeons who deny they have emotions lose themselves," Sarah countered. "You've been running from feelings since Catherine died. Building walls, creating arrangements that let you maintain the illusion of connection without risking actual vulnerability." The truth hung between them, raw and undeniable. Bob's shoulders sagged, the weight of a decade of grief and self-imposed isolation finally showing in his posture. "When Catherine died," he said quietly, "I swore never to put myself in that position again. Never to care so much that losing someone would destroy me. It seemed efficient, logical. And lonely," Sarah added gently, "unbearably lonely." Yes, the simple admission seemed to cost him everything. Sarah took his hand, the surgeon's hand that had tried to save so many lives, that had held her with careful restraint during their months of pretense. "Come home, Robert. You need rest." To her surprise, he didn't resist allowing himself to be led from the office through the hospital corridors, where colleagues watched with concern but knew better than to approach. In the car, he sat silent and still, a man hollowed out by grief, long suppressed and suddenly catastrophically present. At home, Sarah guided him upstairs, helped him out of the blood-stained scrubs, ran a hot shower. She was turning to leave the bathroom when his hand caught her wrist. "Stay," he said, the single word containing volumes of meaning. "Please." So she stayed sitting on the edge of the bathtub while he showered, maintaining a connection that felt suddenly vital, as if he might shatter completely if left alone with his thoughts. Afterwards, she helped him to bed, drawing the curtains against the morning light. "I'll be right outside if you need anything," she said, turning to go. "Sarah." His voice stopped her at the doorway. "Clause 27B. She turned back, finding him watching her with red-rimmed eyes. "What about it?" "I violated it," he admitted, the words barely audible. "I've developed emotional attachment." The confession hung in the air between them, honest and terrifying in its vulnerability. "So have I," Sarah acknowledged quietly. "Then our arrangement is void." "The contract explicitly states—" "I don't care what the contract states," Sarah interrupted, returning to sit beside him on the bed. "Some things are more important than legal documents and career advancements." "I don't know how to do this," Bob confessed, his usual confidence nowhere in evidence. "I've spent 10 years avoiding genuine connection. I'm not sure I remember how." Sarah took his hand, threading her fingers through his. "Neither do I. My marriage to Jack was sweet but brief. Since his death, I've been focused solely on survival. Emma's education, mother's care, keeping our heads above water. I wasn't looking for whatever this is between us. And yet here we are," Bob said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Contractually prohibited from the very feelings we seem to have developed." "Maybe we should start over," Sarah suggested. "No contract, no arrangement, just two people seeing where this might lead." Bob's eyes, usually so guarded, held a vulnerability that transformed his entire face. "I would like that very much." She leaned forward, brushing a gentle kiss across his forehead. "Sleep now. We have time to figure out the details." He caught her hand as she rose. "Will you be here when I wake up?" "Yes," she promised. "I'll be here." And she was sitting in the chair beside the bed with a sketchbook when Bob woke hours later, the worst of his exhaustion addressed if not entirely banished. He watched her drawing for several minutes before she realized he was awake, her pencil moving with quick, confident strokes across the page. "What are you drawing?" he asked, his voice still rough with sleep. Sarah turned the sketchbook toward him. It was his face in repose, but gentler than his waking expression, the habitual tension eased by unconsciousness. "You look younger when you sleep," she observed. "Less burdened." "I feel less burdened right now," he admitted, sitting up against the pillows. "Despite everything that happened at the hospital, despite breaking our agreement, I feel lighter." "Honesty will do that," Sarah said with a small smile. Bob studied her face, seeing beyond the polite mask she'd worn during their months of pretense. "I want to be honest now, completely honest. I've been falling in love with you for months, fighting it every step of the way because it violated our terms, because it terrified me, because I convinced myself I was incapable of those feelings after Catherine." The declaration, delivered in his typical straightforward manner, but with unprecedented emotional content, took Sarah's breath away. "When did you know?" she asked softly. "There wasn't a single moment," Bob reflected. "It accumulated gradually. The way you connect with people, your relationship with Emma, how you saw past my professional persona to the man underneath. The Cape Cod weekend, certainly. Watching you with my mother, your art. 1,000 small moments where you simply were yourself, authentic in a way I'd forgotten how to be." Sarah set aside her sketchbook, moving to sit beside him on the bed. "For me, it was watching you with your patience. You pretend to be prone and clinical, but I've seen how deeply you care about each life in your hands. You hide it well, but not from me. Not anymore." Bob reached up to touch her face, his fingers tracing the curve of her cheek with wonder. "What do we do now? I am chief of medicine. The position is secure. Our arrangement has served its purpose." "We could continue as we are," Sarah suggested. "Not as a business arrangement, but as whatever we're becoming to each other." "I'd like that," Bob said simply. "Very much." This time when they kissed, there was no storm, no audience, no pretense, just the quiet acknowledgement of feelings that had grown despite every contractual prohibition against them. 1 year later, Sarah stood in the same garden where the hospital fundraiser had been held, but this time as the bride rather than a guest. The event was small and intimate, attended only by those closest to them, Emma beaming in her maid of honor dress, Margaret having a remarkably good day, her face alight with joy, Michael and Linda, a few hospital colleagues who had become friends, even Eleanor, who had gradually come to accept, if not entirely approve of Sarah as her daughter-in-law. Diana Blackwell was conspicuously absent, having relocated to Chicago after her father's retirement from the hospital board. Sarah wore a simple ivory gown, elegant rather than ostentatious, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers that reminded her of the Cape Cod shoreline. As she walked down the aisle, her eyes remained fixed on Bob, who watched her approach with undisguised adoration. Their vows were brief, but heartfelt, acknowledging the unusual path that had brought them together. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife legally, they had been married for over a year. But this ceremony marked their emotional commitment. Bob kissed her with a tenderness that still surprised and delighted her. At the reception, as twilight painted the garden in soft lavender light, Bob pulled Sarah away from the celebration for a private moment. They stood by a fountain, reminiscent of the spot where they had first seen each other, across a crowded room at the wedding that had started everything. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket and producing a small folded paper. It was a cocktail napkin from the hotel bar. Sarah unfolded it, finding a single sentence written in Bob's precise handwriting. "The final clause, Robert Westfield and Sarah Westfield hereby agree to love each other fully and without reservation for all the days of their lives." Below it were 2 lines for signatures, echoing their original contract, but representing something infinitely more valuable. "Shall we make it official?" Bob asked, producing a pen from his pocket. Sarah laughed, joy bubbling up from deep within. "This is the best contract you've ever written." They leaned against the fountain, using the cool marble as a makeshift desk, and signed their names on the napkin. Bob took it from her, folded it carefully, and placed it in his jacket pocket, close to his heart. "Binding for a lifetime," he said, his voice full of a love he no longer tried to hide. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, a slow, sweet kiss that held all the promises of their future. Their story had started with a lie whispered in a crowded room, a game of pretend with impossible rules. But it had ended here with a truth written on a napkin, a testament to the beautiful, undeniable fact that some contracts are made to be broken, and the heart's attachments cannot be governed by legal clauses. As they returned to their wedding celebration, hand in hand, Sarah reflected on the strange, wonderful journey that had brought them to this moment. The arrangement had given her financial security, yes, but it had given Bob something far more precious, the courage to live again, to feel again, to love again. And that was worth more than any contract could ever specify.